Okay, we will get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar with Interbit Data CEO and President Arthur Young. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items to go over with you. First, please note that all participants have been placed on mute upon entry. Second, as an attendee, you're unable to see the other attendees in today's meeting. And finally, we would like to encourage everyone to ask a question or provide feedback. You can do that using the chat function found on the right-hand sidebar of your WebEx window. Feel free to make use of this throughout today's webinar as we will be monitoring it. And finally, we do appreciate you spending your time with us today. We know that your time is valuable and we think you'll find it highly productive use of your time. And with that, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Arthur Young. Arthur has been a healthcare technology entrepreneur since 1997. He holds master's degrees in both social work and business administration, and he's become an expert in helping health systems solve problems, maintain business continuity, and become more efficient. With that, I'll turn things over to Arthur. Go ahead, Arthur.
Thank you, Sven, and thank you, everybody, for attending today. Hope you'll find it useful. I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about our agenda. The presentation today is going to start with a little bit of an overview of cybersecurity. And then we're going to move on to reviewing some of the tactics that are being used to protect organizations. And that leads to developing a response plan that will be attuned to your organization. After that, we'll have some time for questions and answers. And I guess I'll get started. Basically, before we start talking about cybersecurity, we need to make sure that we understand some of the language that's used and the words. And ultimately, these are the tactics that are used by the criminals exploiting cybersecurity. So, generally, we're talking about what I would call malware. It's programs that are designed to do evil things, like, you've heard of ransomware, things will deliver programs that can take over your machine, or viruses, or different types of attacks on devices. Phishing, you've probably heard of. Phishing is a mechanism that's used to either deliver the malware or to entice people into going to a place where their information can be captured, and so capturing logons and all of that, and malicious bots or automated processes and exploit kits. All of these tools and processes are actually now available on the dark web as subscription services. So, your cyber criminal can just be utilizing tools that have been developed by other people and just be attacking your system. So it's an industry, and that it's an industry when you see the number of attacks that have happened over the last, within the current year, and the acceleration of all these attacks. This is just a summary of some of the sites that have been attacked actually in the first half of the year. The second half of the year actually had an increase above the number of attacks for the first half. So the attacks are increasing and growing in number and even in severity. You may have heard about specifically the Universal Health Services, which was hit with a ransomware attack a couple of months ago, and basically it immobilized, I believe it was 23 sites running out of their web-based applications, bringing them down to manual systems for over a week before they're able to recover operations. Basically, there were high-profile ransomware attacks last month in several states, and the FBI, HHS, and CISA all reported that there were identified about 400 different hospital sites on a list that was possibly going to be attacked by cyber criminals. So they're getting more ambitious and more wide-ranging. So significant public event. Also, there were last month a few ransomware attacks identified. A health plan or 3-hospital network in New York, site in Oregon, site in Vermont, but in fact, there was an alert sent out by the FBI, by HHS, and by CISA, warning that there was a potential list of 400 healthcare sites that potentially were targeted by attackers over the next few months. And they did publish this alert just to put everybody on notice that that we may be seeing more and more occurrences. And certainly it's been a bad enough year as it is for healthcare in terms of coping with COVID and those after effects, for cyber criminals to also be taking advantage. But in fact, healthcare facilities are projected to suffer, 2 or 3 times the number of an already high number of attacks in the next year. One of the reasons for that, or there are several reasons for it. Well, one of the reasons is there's great value in the information that's contained within that PHI. In fact, the value of a patient record can be as much as $1,000 versus an actual credit card number. Supposedly the pricing on the black market may be $150, $200, whereas a patient record, the patient information may be $1,000. So that's tremendous value. Also, the challenge that healthcare has in terms of rising to protect themselves against some of these threats is significant. Now, it's significant because everybody is looking for money and there's IT cost constraints. But it's also significant because, you are all running a hybrid of systems. When you think about the systems that you have your HCIS, which I'm sure you're all trying to keep up to date, but but each area of the hospital may also have their own dedicated systems. Some of those systems you don't even think of as systems, but, well, I guess you do, but, your certain products like nursing call systems or ICU, CCU types of electronics, which have been a significant investment and may actually be based on older technology. So it's not able to be updated to the most current releases and protection. There are any number of hospitals who may be running, Windows 7 systems because, this piece of equipment requires it. And, it's a significant investment to migrate forward. So you're trying to do a balancing act with your investment in critical systems. You're adding IoT devices, which is great, except unfortunately it's been identified that those IoT manufacturers aren't necessarily keeping the most up-to-date and best practices in terms of security. But at the same time, you're trying to protect your PHI and manage access. You're actually also being called upon to share your PHI more broadly, whether it's through mergers and acquisitions between multiple sites, or whether it's simply trying to advance care collaboration. You're being asked to allow access to information more broadly at the same time that you're trying to, put constraints on that access. And so it's a tremendous balancing act, and it's a tremendous challenge. And it's made worse with, what's important today, and your priority may be related to COVID, and that puts its own constraints on items. So it's a challenge. It's a tough year, and if you look at what the root causes are, there are a number of things, some of which are related to like the cloud misconfiguration. Well, this is, again, it's access rules, and it's making things accessible at the same time that you're protecting them. It's third-party vendors who are necessary parts of your environment, and yet you need to rely upon them to ensure that the system is secure and protected. But ultimately, one of the greatest places where these breaches come up, it just has to do with users. And when I worked at one software company, they were trying to figure out how to secure the payroll information. And they figured out the best way. And the best way was to put the computer that the payroll information was on inside a safe, and there was no access to it by anyone outside of the safe. So great way to secure information. If nobody can actually get to it at all, then that's safe. But that's not, the utility of what we're doing is, broadening access and increasing the quality of the information that we have and the utility of it. So, we need to be expanding, and at the same time, we need to ensure that those controls are in place. Again, just as a look at where we are today. Right now, these are some numbers that, it may be in aggregate, the average cost of a data breach today, and this is, where either somebody has gotten into the system, or some of these breaches where devices have been left with unsecured PHI and things. But the actual cost to the institution may be as much as $7 million, which is going up year after year, because the protection and then the associated liability in terms of what needs to be done for HIPAA, and whether you're going to be liable for HIPAA fines, and higher advertising spend. Okay, so once you've seen these publicly disclosed events, well, you need to work on the PR to make sure that people, that your patients and your providers are made comfortable that there's not a threat in associating themselves with the breached site. Currently, the average ransom demand has been about $230,000, of which, many times the best advice that people have is to pay the ransom. Or that's the advice that they get. I don't know what's best, I can't say. But so, of an average demand of 230, there actually are paying 112. And a lot of that is, in fact, hopefully coming from insurance coverage. But what that means in terms of your expectation of how much your coverage is going to go up to. And in fact, based on the industry averages, how much overall that insurance premium is going to go up. The other amazing number is that the associated downtime with something like a ransomware attack is up to 15 days. So it's really important to understand, identification of the breach can take a while, and containing it can take a while. But again, there's a significant impact to your patients. Where you begin in all of this is just figuring out how vulnerable are you. You identify what the practices are to protect yourself. There's, software, the anti-malware protection, antivirus protection, spam filtering, all of those things that you need to implement. At the same time, there is nothing that's going to protect you 100%. So you need to be looking at, first of all, that the tools you're utilizing have the ability to learn and to update themselves to current information. It needs to be essentially a subscription. But then you also need to look at, the other areas of vulnerability within your environment. Anti-phishing capabilities is, again, a key where a lot of these breaches begin, is, providing an email that looks real, that tempts the recipient to click on something, and that click could be actually infecting the institution, or it could be going to a website where they might enter information and then reveal passwords and all of that. So those are things you need to look at. What is your preparation? What is what are you doing? Data backups. Okay, data backups are important. You need to be looking at how you're doing it, how you're working on your network, how you're monitoring information, how you're logging and investigating the logs. Multi-factor authentication. This is personally, I can attest to the fact that it's kind of a hassle, especially as somebody who doesn't like having their phone with them all the time. But in fact, it's one of the most effective tools, because even if some user authentication information is compromised, the multi-factor authentication may prevent it from being able to be used, because it's not just that information which is more or less static, but it's then that additional element of challenging the authenticity of the user. And so that's a very a good thing that needs to be promoted throughout the industry. But again, you need to assess all of this, and you need to have the ability to do something about it. And again, we're all being challenged to do more and more as each day goes on. I'll mention something, I want to point out, backup and recovery. Okay, so I'm sure everybody has spent a lot of time in ensuring HIPAA or FIPA compliance for Canadians. The fact that there are processes, and one of the processes that's talked about is, ensuring that there are frequent backups, that you have ways of recovering the information, that you're even making sure that you have multiple sites where you can preserve the data, and that you should have a plan and be testing it on a periodic basis. Now, that's all important. One of the issues, though, that seems to be a shortcoming is that what your auditors and what the HIPAA regulations are concerned about seem to be more data integrity. The fact that you are managing a patient's record and you shouldn't lose information in that record, that all of the data that's been preserved there is important to the whole picture. And so you want to avoid any possibility of data being lost. So you're very concerned about ensuring the data integrity. The fact that you can ensure that all the data is there and accurate doesn't necessarily mean that the people in the hospital have access to it in case of some sort of a downtime. Okay, so it's geared to the integrity, not necessarily the operations, because all of the things that are talking about ensuring up-to-the-minute copies and all of that doesn't necessarily mean that it's up-to-the-minute access. And so that's something to examine in terms of your plan. You also need to recognize that cyber attacks don't occur when you hear about them. They've actually occurred weeks and months before, because it's the infection that begins to build within the environment. And so it may start at one vulnerable point, but more frequently than not, it will replicate itself. One of the reasons why it's called viruses, but it replicates itself throughout the organization before it actually reaches the critical mass that launches the attack. And so even your backups may be compromised. So if in fact you are suffering from a cyber attack, you need to recognize that your backups may not be an instant recovery, because you're going to have to be sure to examine those backups if you can, to make sure that they don't contain some of the same malware that has caused the problem to begin with. And then you have the problem of, ransomware. Now, ransomware, again, it's typically turned on well after it's begun to infect the organization. But once it's turned on, basically your IT environment is a set of paperweights. I mean, you don't have access to the machine. I mean, the data may be there, but it's inaccessible. And, the data itself is encrypted. You can't get around this. You need to rebuild. And again, anything on your network is potentially compromised. So you need to figure out how you're going to operate, or what the contingency plan is to ensure that you have the information that you need and the ability to operate if your whole system has been compromised. And you need to think about, what does that mean, area by area. So you're building a plan. You want to create the right set of measures. I mean, I've always said, and maybe it shows that I'm not really a security person. I'm still a social worker, but I've always observed that I think healthcare can afford 95% protection. Banking affords 99%. The cost difference in that last 4% can become enormous. So, it's why you need to minimize complexity. I'm sure you're already familiar with complex passwords. Well, complex passwords have a sort of feedback loop that the more complex they are, the more you're challenging somebody to put a stick-it note on their terminal or their PC monitor, and basically eliminate any security because they can't remember it, so they have to write it down so it's there for even somebody else to see. So there's a compromise between a complexity that allows people to utilize it and getting the benefit that you're looking for, which is that security, which is why as proximity devices and other types of thumbprint or face recognition or whatever, all of these things advance in ability. It's better than more complex passwords because I usually have my face with me. Although with masks, it's changed. My iPhone doesn't always recognize me. So, but anyway, every time you're looking at things, you absolutely want to ensure that you're protecting the system. You want to automate it, but you also want it easy to comply with. So you need to improve detection. You need to look at ways that you can prioritize access and monitor access. And, ensure, what do you do if the system's not available? System not being available, again, is not just downtime related to cyber attacks, but, other sorts of downtime and global warming and all of that is created weather related downtimes and all of that. But basically, you need to look at what can you do most efficiently and automatically to ensure, and so some of those things that you do look at, you look at and you examine your storage and recovery process. Storage as a service and offline backup and restoration. Again, those are tools that you can utilize that become more and more cost effective, but they're not in and of themselves a total solution. Multi-factor authentication, as I say, I have to say is, should be a no-brainer at this point. It is, it is an inconvenience to people, but it's such a basic item that really assists in your overall strategy that it's really critical to be implemented. But as critical is training and training your people to recognize, to do simulations, so that people are tested with different types of phishing attacks or whatever, and also that people need to be able to have a resource to go to. I mean, there's a lot of training that goes on in the hospital, and hopefully we need to test people on it, and we need to have places where people can go for information. Another item that, again, is absolute is, the next generation antivirus systems, which are all, utilizing artificial intelligence, because the methodologies and the specific malware components may evolve and change, but AI allows the next generation systems to recognize, something that looks like something else, and to be able to enhance and learn. And part of it too is that it is a subscription. It is something that moves and changes and grows with you. So those are all very important to recognize. So what are your best practices? What should you be doing, and how do you establish them? You need to look at your cybersecurity policies and procedures. Make sure that you have outlined them along with your other, policies and procedures. And, the policies and procedures need to get very practical in these areas. You need to be sure that you're training users and testing them. You need to use two-factor authentication, because the biggest entrance to your system, one way or the other, is through your users. And whatever you can do to ensure them, and as I've said before, I'm a former mental health professional, but it is paranoia. It is actual people who are charged with security and cybersecurity I mean, the experts, it's really amazing how much they question and how little they trust. But that's the key. I mean, you got to think of the extreme examples to begin to build your defense. And the fact is that it's not the ability to recognize the same thing, because it changes and it morphs over time. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why sometimes people are using traps for hackers and things like that, so that you give them a target to go to that's better than going to your system. But these are all things that are developed as part of your strategy, but you need to be, working to use the tools that are out there as well as you can, but you need to ensure that you're training your users, and you're encouraging them to question things, and you're giving them potentially a place that if they think that this email looks suspicious, they need to have somebody who they can bounce that concern off of. It needs to, they need to be challenged and encouraged to question things, and to be in practice for those things. So that's all very important. And really, ultimately, as far as building that strategy, you need to think of, what do you need if you are attacked? Part of your plan is, how am I going to recover? And, healthcare is certainly familiar with the idea of triage. And that's really what you need to think about in terms of, because different areas of the hospital are going to have different needs and different timeframes. I mean, everybody is important, but you need to be able to build that attack. I mean, what do you do for patients who are in an OR already, versus people who are scheduled to go into the OR? And so a lot of the triage starts to look at, okay, what do you have to do? But also, what do you have to communicate? And who do you have to communicate to? So, how are you going to communicate to the people who are unscheduled to the OR? Maybe that things are running late or whatever. And again, remember that some of the mechanisms that you have automated to do these things may not be available. So what are you going to do to ensure that communication? Things like, that are now, baked into the structure, e-prescribing. Okay, so what do you do? Hopefully you have a short downtime, but what happens if there is an extended downtime? What do you do in terms of communicating with your pharmacies and communicating with staff, communicating with other service providers who may be involved? You need to think about not just what are you going to do, but remember that, your email system in a ransomware attack is not going to be available. So your email system may have actually your contact list. So where are you going to find out what somebody's phone number is without access? So you need to think about that preparation. It is like going back to the dark ages or whatever, but it's that preparation that hopefully you don't need it, but it's important to build out, what is this going to look like, or what would this look like? You need to manage that process. You need to manage people and ensure that they're feeling comfortable, and that's both staff, outside providers, as well as, your patients in-house. So you need to work out that communication plan. How are you going to talk with people? And again, there needs to be a continuity that one of the priorities in terms of that triage is that you have patients in-house, and you need to be sure that you're able to continue to provide the care for them. And that certainly leads into our commercial about some of the things that we do. But basically, it's a description of, a continuum of downtime, that you have downtimes that you plan for and you can test that. And you have some downtimes that are unplanned, maybe, power outage or communications lines get disrupted, or a disaster where fires or floods or whatever. And then the new element, which is the cyber attack, which has some different nuances than the previous sorts of downtimes. But you still need to be thinking about what are you going to do to ensure access to the information you need to provide care. Our NetSafe solution has been in place at hundreds of hospitals for many years. And what we do there is ensure that the information that's the critical information that you need to provide that patient care is available where the patient is. So in case of any interruption, that information will be available and secured to reference so that you can continue to provide care. And now, with the advent of the challenges of cybercrime, we have a new product, which is our Cyber Crisis Vault, which we can't necessarily be exactly where the patient is, because anything that's on your patient network is potentially compromised, and that machine that's being used for the point of care in NetSafe may be a paperweight like every other one. So what we've done is we've created a mechanism to have or to deploy a hardened and protected version of our NetSafe product, so that you can basically have that information available on a device that is not part of your network, that it is fully protected from your network, and may even have different information than you would usually have, because, in case of a cyber attack, you want to have, copies of forms. As I say, you want to have different lists of names and addresses and stuff. And that's on top of the standard information that you would want about, medication administration and all of that. So our NetSafe Cyber Crisis Vault is a complement to the point of care protection, and is necessary because of the different threat that the cyber attack takes, and the different ways that it can compromise other types of contingency plans. So again, we can talk more about that. It should be part of the overall plan and strategy to identify what you're going to do to prevent, what you're going to do in case of the worst happens, and then as part of that, what are you going to do to take care of your patients that are in the hospital. So I will open up for questions and Sue.
Thank you, Arthur. And as a reminder, you can ask a question by using the Q&A or chat function found on the right-hand sidebar of your WebEx window. Arthur, to get started, we have a question. This is asking for your advice. What would be the best starting point to begin to attack the problem of cybersecurity vulnerability?
Well, again, the best part is to assess where you're at and to identify, and a lot of times this is done with the assistance of specialists, the people who are doing some of your HIPAA audits, and I'm sure you're doing a lot of the management on your own, but the people who do those have expanded frequently into a sort of cyber risk analysis, but also your partners who are providing security software for you and maybe other protection services for you may be very useful people to get involved in, first the risk analysis and then prioritization of what needs to be done, and ultimately assembling it into a plan and strategy that can be documented and shared with staff.
Next question, what resources do you recommend for staying informed on cybersecurity, publications and or websites?
Well, again, this is a good commercial for, we will be building a reference or a links page to give you some good resources, but certainly, first of all, if you are subscribing to antivirus, anti-malware services, then those vendors typically have their own newsletters and blogs that will help to keep you informed. The CISA, as mentioned earlier, they have, and NIST have alerts that you can subscribe to, which will tell you about threats that have been identified in the environment, in the technical environment, et cetera. I think that the most down to earth information is coming from the antivirus, anti-malware community, and there are also some specialized healthcare information systems websites that also will regularly provide you with information about risk factors that are out there. So those are great places to just subscribe to and keep in your inbox.
And a reminder that if you want to ask a question, you can use the function on the right-hand sidebar to do so. Another question for you, Arthur. How scalable is the NetSafe solution? We've got multiple facilities to deal with across a large geographic area.
Yeah, NetSafe in all its flavors is very scalable and can be deployed in the cloud, out of the cloud. It can be deployed, as we mentioned, with from a data center to different hospital locations, and actually so can the cyber protection can also be deployed in a variety of ways, and it is very scalable. It's totally adjustable to your environment and to the priorities within that environment.
And lastly, where do Interbit's solutions fit into a cybersecurity solution? Cybersecurity strategy.
Yeah, well, as I say, we're part of the plan. I mean, we're not going to prevent a cyber attack. I mean, we need to be working on, identifying and protection. We're part of the plan for what if the worst case occurs? And, we recognize in healthcare, unlike other models that, people may look at, the issue in healthcare is more frequently than not, one event is too many for an adverse thing. One medication error is too many. So you need to protect against any, but then you need to identify what if the worst happens. So you need to be prepared for that outlier. And unfortunately, I used to be able to say things about these events happening with little frequency, but I think the latest statistics show that I think it was something like 90% of healthcare providers had experienced some sort of a breach or cyber attack within the past 4 years. So unfortunately, it's becoming more commonplace, and that's why solutions like ours are important to establishing a comprehensive plan to deal with the protecting your environment.
All right. Well, we are out of time with that. So I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining our webinar today. We will be making available a recording of this presentation on Interbit's website. That's interbitdata.com. And from Arthur and everyone else here at Interbit Data, thank you once again, and we hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you again. Take care.